We don't know the wool poll results yet, but if that was a council election or a state election, people would say, well, we need to have another election because hardly anyone voted.
On the Flow Morning Show, we turn to our agriculture report and have Rikki Lambert and the talking issue of wool and the prospects for Australian wool producers. Rikki, there's been some very interesting developments in the last 24 hours in relation to David Littleproud and a release that he's put out which looks at a grant to look into other domestic or international locations for processing Australian wool.
The Federal Agriculture Minister, I think that's an Agincourt salute to the Chinese. I can read between the lines well enough in politics to know there's a frustration that a lot of our wool goes to China and is processed. This is a positive sign for Australia that what we've talked about all year, Wayne, is rebuilding Australia's domestic manufacturing, food and fibre manufacturing base. That's exactly what Minister Littleproud's on about.
Okay, so you talk regularly to Stephen Reid from Michell Wool. They're one of the biggest wool processors. They have an outlet where they process in Australia at Salisbury, north of Adelaide, and then also over in China. He's had some interesting commentary surrounding this.
Yeah, I thought I'd just check in with him when we do our regular update on how the wool market progresses each week, and these full comments you can hear on the Flow News 24 podcast. But I asked him just how logistics are travelling in China, and have a listen to this.
So there's an 8-week waiting list to get a vessel, and the container rates used to be $1,200 US a container, and now they're talking to $25,000 US a container. So one is a cost of bomb, which is extraordinary, and I filled up the car yesterday and got excited about the price of petrol, but that's nothing compared to the rises we're seeing in freight. One is the price. The second is, can you get a vessel? It's just extraordinary.
So that is an astonishing upgrade from what $1,200 he said was the traditional cost to $25,000 is the cost of getting a shipping container out of China at the moment. It is the perfect opportunity for the Australian government to strike.
It is. When you start to talk about the changes in freight costs, that then may make it more profitable for our wool growers if their wool was to be processed right here on shore. Now, there is some facility to do that, but looks like the federal government might be looking to encourage other facilities onshore.
Yeah, onshore would be fantastic, or maybe developing a capability somewhere in Southeast Asia. But I tell you what, wool producers really need to engage with their grower body, the AWI and the like, because this conversation I had with Stephen Reid went on to him running for the board. He wasn't successful. Wool producers, those that bothered voting, voted for the status quo, keep the levy rate as it is, keep the board as it is. But when I've been asking Stephen off air, well, how many people actually voted, this is what he had to say.
Yeah, I must admit the biggest lesson I learned was the lack of interest by growers. They spend a small fortune on that company, and only 6% of them actually voted. Now, the wool poll one I haven't got handy with me in the car, but certainly the election was 6.7% of eligible shareholders actually voted. And then if you divide that back, there's so many shareholders or levy payers who haven't actually registered to be a shareholder. So we're talking 95% of growers are not interested and don't vote.
So that's a remarkably low turnout, Wayne. We don't know the wool poll results yet, but if that was a council election or a state election, people would say, well, we need to have another election because hardly anyone voted.
And two, if it's such a low amount of people voting, is it that wool growers have lost interest, or do they feel that the governing body is just going to be business as usual? When we talked about the grain situation and we had a single desk many years ago, there was a real strong push within the industry for there to be multiple forms of marketing of that product. Is it that wool is too controlled? And maybe we need to see the wool growers more vocal about where wool should go, and perhaps even on things like onshore processing.
Well, when you look at this $662,000 that's being given to them to investigate a business case for processing, you'd want to make sure that gets the result that wool growers want to grow a domestic capability. And I'm not trying to blow Stephen Reid's trumpet here. He's a wool processor, unlike the producers that were elected to the board. He's got experience in that area. We keep talking to him every week, but I would have thought that you need to make sure that your levies are going towards creating good opportunities and effectively reducing your costs and increasing your profitability as an Australian farmer.
Well, the freight costs could have a significant position to play in what happens to Australian wool in the future. We'll follow this story here on our Agriculture Reports, and thank Rikki Lambert for joining us.